Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Coming Home to Yourself podcast. I'm your host, Vanessa, and here we'll dive into everything healing, mindset, confidence, manifestation, and how to become your most empowered self, aka coming home to yourself. Oh my gosh, guys. Today marks 1 month that I started this podcast, and I just have to say thank you so much to everyone who's been listening, supporting, and just overall benefiting from this series. We already went international in like 10 different countries all over the world on 3 different platforms, and we got some reviews already. I'm just so stoked about it, so happy about it. And we're only getting started, right? So I just wanted to throw it out there, letting you know how grateful I am for your support. Keep on giving it. I'm gonna keep on giving you more episodes and more seasons. And just let's make this a worldwide thing. Also, I recommend you stay until the very end because I've got an announcement to make as well, which is so exciting. But for now, I would say without further ado, let's get into it. So, in today's episode, we're diving into the power of emotional regulation. So, what it is, why it matters, and how it connects to emotional intelligence and resilience. This episode will help you understand how mastering your emotions can transform the way you navigate life, strengthen your relationships, and help you come home to yourself. Especially after the last episode where we were talking about how to heal from past trauma, right? So let's start with the basics here. What is emotional regulation? Well, emotional regulation at its core is the ability to manage and respond to your emotions in a way that aligns with your values and goals, rather than being controlled by them, right? So it's about finding balance and not suppressing or avoiding your emotions, but understanding them and making intentional choices about how to respond. So I want you to think about a time when someone cut you off in traffic, for example. If you reacted impulsively, maybe you yelled or honked your horn in anger. I mean, how many times do people post about having insane road rage? Now that's a moment when your emotions controlled you. Now imagine taking a deep breath and just reminding yourself that the other driver might be having a bad day or is just in a rush for an emergency and choosing to let it go. That's emotional regulation in action. My mentor Ditch always says to have the most generous interpretation. So for a moment like this, for example, you never know why that person is speeding like that or acting like that. Maybe they are in a hurry and really need to get somewhere, right? Maybe it's an emergency. Maybe they're just an idiot who cannot behave. But either way, it should not affect you. But it's also not just about managing anger. Emotional regulation applies to all emotions, right? So joy, sadness, frustration, excitement, and even fear. It even applies to feelings like shame, jealousy, guilt, and so on. It's basically what allows you to celebrate success without arrogance, or navigate grief without becoming consumed by despair, or even feel embarrassed about a situation without shaming yourself and overthinking it. Now, why is emotional regulation so important apart from the aspects that I've mentioned just now? Well, in general, when you don't regulate your emotions, they can spiral out of control, leading to completely destructive behavior, strained relationships, or just overall internal stress. On the other hand, when you master emotional regulation, you gain control over your life. It's that simple. You're no longer at the mercy of external circumstances because instead you respond with more of a clearer mind and intentionality. For example, think about losing your job, right? Without emotional regulation, you might spiral into complete hopelessness, lash out at loved ones, or avoid taking action to move forward altogether. With emotional regulation, though, you still feel sadness or disappointment or whatever it is that you feel, but you can process those emotions constructively, seek support, and even make a plan to find new opportunities, right, to move forward. So you are handling the situation more productively. You are solution orientated instead of problem orientated. So you simply don't make a bigger deal out of the situation than it needs to be, even if it is a very tough one, right? You feel it, you sit through it while regulating yourself, and then you act accordingly. Now, let's connect this to emotional intelligence, which is the foundation for emotional regulation, right? Emotional intelligence is your ability to understand, interpret, and manage emotions, both yours and others. And it's made up of 4 key components that I want to talk about. So the first one is self-awareness. And self-awareness is about recognizing what you're feeling in the moment. Without it, emotional regulation is impossible. So imagine being in an argument and suddenly feeling overwhelmed but not knowing why. If you lack self-awareness, you might lash out or completely withdraw from the whole situation, right? But if you're tuned into your emotions, you realize oh, I'm feeling defensive because I'm afraid of being misunderstood. That awareness gives you the power to take a step back and respond more thoughtfully. Another example for the visual learners of you could be a parent dealing with a tantrum from their child, right? Maybe you're the parent. If the parent lacks self-awareness, they might yell back in frustration, right? So the first response is anger. But if they recognize that their frustration just stems from feeling overwhelmed, they can pause and address the situation more calmly. On that note, I believe if more parents were to take a step back in moments like that, we would have way less insecure children. So because situations like these, if they happen on a regular and a parent's first response is always anger, that affects children in a way that makes them feel like a burden, which then often leads to more isolation of them, which then often leads to hyper-independency, feelings of not being good enough, or just being a people pleaser to keep the peace, right? On to the next topic, which is self-regulation. And self-regulation builds on self-awareness. It's about using that awareness to choose how you respond, right? So imagine a friend of yours making a passive-aggressive comment to you in an everyday situation. Instead of snapping or shutting down, you take a moment to breathe and remind yourself that their behavior reflects their own insecurities, not yours. By regulating your emotions, you stay composed and mature and don't engage in unnecessary drama or don't feed into others' projections, but you can simply hold them instead, right? Now, the third one is empathy. And empathy is the ability to understand and connect with the emotions of others. This is where emotional intelligence extends beyond yourself, right? So let's say your friend is venting about a tough day. Instead of offering advice or dismissing their feelings completely, you listen and validate their experience. On a side note here, I want you to take this with a grain of salt because it also depends on whether it's a moment that needs empathy or whether this person is being completely ridiculous not from your perspective, but from a general point of view, okay? There's a difference between your friend coming to you to vent about an overall bad day where a lot went wrong and they just feel defeated or annoyed versus them being a little brat and coming at you like, can you believe I had to use a blue pen today because my black pen ran out of ink? My whole day felt off because my notes weren't in the right color. And don't even get me started on how the ink bled slightly on my favorite planner page. It's just ruined now. Can you see the difference? It's so silly. It's such a silly example, but can you see the difference? One thing can have a seriously defeating effect on your morale, while the other is just you absolutely not being self-aware and being completely dysregulated and just over-dramatizing a situation that is not relevant at all, right? Overall, though, empathy not only strengthens relationships, but also helps you manage your own emotions by fostering more of an understanding point of view. The last component is social skills. So the final pillar of emotional intelligence is your ability to navigate life and your relationships. Strong social skills rely on emotional regulation to communicate effectively and resolve conflict. For example, if your business planning with your team is going off track, you use your emotional intelligence to address the issue in a mature manner without placing blame on anybody, keeping the team motivated and focused. Demanding more and better from your team overall in that case would also be another sign of emotional intelligence because you're not afraid to speak your mind, you set your boundaries and you push your team harder but in a more productive way. Now let's talk about emotional resilience, which is the ability to bounce back from setbacks and challenges. And emotional regulation and intelligence are both the building blocks of that exact resilience. So when you regulate your emotions and understand them deeply, you become more adaptable and less likely to be derailed by life's ups and downs, right? For example, let's say you're going through a nasty breakup, okay? Without resilience, you will most probably dwell on the loss, blame yourself or overly blame your ex for being an asshole, or give up on future relationships altogether because of the common narrative. For example, men ain't trash, men are bad, men are this and that, right? But with resilience, you are able to simply acknowledge your pain, you learn from the experience, and eventually move forward with hope and self-love. So you are able to take the time and put the work into yourself to heal properly and realize that this doesn't define you or relationships overall. You know you will get through this and come out stronger. Another example might be that you're absolutely not in the mood to work out and you're just completely exhausted, and maybe you're in a sad mood and even just want to cry all day, right? So your emotions are heightened, you're overthinking, you're fighting against your ego, and you just want to lay in bed and self-pity. But instead, you're getting your shit together and move your butt to the gym after all. You're pushing through the workout without a complaint. You're not starting to cry or to vent or project onto someone else around you of how you don't want to be there and you would rather stay in bed, right? You work out properly and then you go back home and do your thing. This is what emotional resilience is about, and in this example, it ties together with discipline. Now, a key aspect of resilience is perspective, how you interpret challenges. Someone with a resilient mindset might view a failure not as a sign of inadequacy, but as a stepping stone to growth, right? So consider an athlete who loses a major competition. Instead of giving up, they analyze what went wrong, adjust their training, and come back stronger. So emotional resilience is what differentiates good people from great people. And it makes all the difference in the world in your behavior and your mindset. Let's discuss what happens when you don't regulate your emotions, right? Unchecked emotions can lead to strained relationships, for example. So outbursts, passive aggressiveness, or shutting down can push people away, right? Then we have mental and physical stress. So constant emotional turmoil can lead to anxiety, depression, and even physical symptoms like headaches or fatigue or something worse. Then there's missed opportunities. So reacting impulsively can close doors for you, whether in personal or professional settings. You never know. I want you to remember that the journey to emotional regulation starts with awareness. Awareness of your triggers, patterns, and reactions. So it requires some curiosity and compassion and not judgment, okay? You can simply start, for example, by asking yourself, what emotions do I struggle with the most? When do I feel most reactive? How can I create space between feeling and acting? When I feel this certain emotion in this certain situation, how can I best respond to it instead of overreacting to it? Remember, this is a skill that takes practice. So each time you pause before reacting, you are strengthening your emotional resilience. Okay. And a little tip for me is that when you notice you're in a situation that triggered you badly and you feel like you want to lash out, react, or explode, just take a few deep breaths. Breathe deeply 3 times before you even respond to anything. Maybe count to 3 before you respond, but just take a second, literally. Even if you feel like it's awkward or weird or inappropriate, just do it, because the only thing that's worse is if you're going to lash out on a person or situation. Now, let's take this whole topic even deeper and dive into the neuroscience behind it all. Because to truly grasp the power of emotional regulation, it's helpful to understand what is even happening in your brain when you experience emotions in the first place, okay? Your emotional responses are largely governed by the limbic system, specifically the amygdala, which is responsible for processing your fear, your pleasure, and other intense emotions, right? And when you're triggered, the amygdala sends out an immediate response. So think of it as your brain's alarm system that goes off once you're feeling all kinds of things during a trigger or an overreaction, all right? But here's the catch. The amygdala doesn't always consider context, okay? So it reacts instinctively, which is why you might feel a surge of anger over something super small, like let's say someone is taking your parking spot, right? Which is generally not a big deal, but we all know that frustration that comes rushing over us in moments like that, okay? And this is where the prefrontal cortex comes in, which is the part of your brain responsible for rational thinking, decision making, and impulse control. So, when you regulate your emotions, you're essentially using your prefrontal cortex to calm down the amygdala and bring logic into the situation. Now, imagine you're at work and a colleague critiques your idea in a meeting. Your amygdala might interpret this as a personal attack, causing you to feel embarrassed or defensive, so you're being triggered. But if you engage your prefrontal cortex by taking a moment and breathe and assess the situation, you can remind yourself that the critique isn't about you. It's about improving the project, right? And this allows you to respond constructively instead of reacting emotionally and, on top of that, unprofessionally. But then again, emotional regulation doesn't just affect your inner world. It's a game changer for your relationships as well. So I want you to think about how many conflicts arise from mismanaged emotions, whether it's snapping at your partner over a dirty dish or escalating an argument with a friend over a misunderstanding. I want you to think, how many times have you snapped at your partner and blamed it on the period? How many times have you snapped at your parents and blamed it onto their inflicting childhood trauma onto you? How many times have you snapped at someone in general and blamed it onto you being simply stressed and it all being too much? Right? I thought so. Too many times. Probably even daily. And let me tell you something. That is just another example of something that is very common, but is definitely not normal. When you regulate your emotions, you create space for understanding and connection. So instead of letting anger or frustration drive the conversation, you can communicate your needs calmly and effectively. And this not only resolves conflicts more quickly, but also strengthens your bond with others. All right? Now, obviously, a critical part of mastering emotional regulation is identifying your triggers. So, those specific situations, people, or experiences that consistently provoke a strong emotional reaction within you. And I want you to know that triggers can vary widely from person to person. So, let me give you a few examples of them. The first one being environmental triggers. So let's say loud noises, crowded spaces, or disorganization in your home, something like that. The second being relational triggers. So you might be feeling dismissed during a conversation, or you're being compared to others, or you're revisiting unresolved conflicts, right? All of those things could trigger you. The third one being internal triggers. So things like fatigue, hunger, your period, or even overall hormonal changes that make you more prone to emotional responses. Then we have emotional triggers. So the feeling of not being good enough, feelings of insecurity overall, the feeling of not belonging, right? There's a bunch of different ones I could name. But once you identify your triggers, you can begin to reframe your reactions. So instead of seeing them as obstacles, view them as opportunities to practice emotional regulation. So let's say your trigger is criticism. Whenever someone critiques you, you feel unworthy or defensive, right? So I want you to start by asking yourself, why does this bother me so much? Maybe it stems from a childhood belief that you had to be perfect to be loved, right? It could be anything. But understanding this can help you reframe criticism as a tool for growth rather than a personal attack each time it shows up. Then another crucial aspect of emotional regulation is simply naming what you're feeling. This might sound too simple to be effective and sound so silly, but research actually shows that labeling your emotions can already reduce their intensity, simply because you're shifting your focus, right? When you name an emotion, you shift the activity from the emotional centers of your brain to the logical centers. And this is what helps you gain more clarity and distance from the emotion, making it easier to manage it. So you're basically removing yourself from the subjective point of view and shifting more so into the objective point of view, which makes it easier for you to determine what's going on. Now imagine you've had a long day, and when you get home, your partner asks you for a favor, so to help them with something, right? Instead of snapping and being super annoyed and rude, take a moment to label your emotions. Let's say, oh, I'm feeling overwhelmed and exhausted, and this is why I feel annoyed right now. This acknowledgement alone can diffuse the intensity of your feelings and help you communicate more effectively after that. From there, it's a lot easier to choose the thing that will benefit your partner more instead of making them feel bad for it as well. Okay? On the other hand, high stress situations are the ultimate test of emotional regulation, right? Whether it's a heated argument, a work deadline, the death of a loved one, or a personal crisis, staying calm under pressure is a skill that can transform your life. And it's not just about staying calm through it and basically dismissing the pressure, but it's about regulating yourself during it. So managing to move through it without overwhelm. Okay. So pushing through that overwhelm and just being able to navigate the whole situation and coming out stronger so that next time it shows up, you're going to be more regulated from the beginning. Now, I'm going to give you another very common example of what a high stress situation might look like. So, I want you to picture yourself stuck in traffic, for example, running late for an important meeting or just a place that you have to be on time, right? Your heart races and frustration builds up as every car seems to move slower. On top of that, every shortcut you try to take seems to be even more blocked that day, right? We all know this situation. Instead of letting the stress take over, you remind yourself, I cannot control traffic, but I can control my response. You turn on calming music, focus on your breathing, and use the time to mentally prepare for whatever it is that you have to go to. Don't bring that energy to that person, that place, or that situation. This overall shift in focus not only protects your mental health, but also helps you arrive at your destination with a clear head, ready to tackle the task at hand, right? The same counts for when you are exercising and you're working out and you just cannot push through that last rep, right? You want to throw tantrums, you just cannot get it right, or you cannot get a movement right overall during a set. Instead of just lashing out, being a little kid throwing a tantrum, giving up, saying you're calling it a day and just going home, you push through it. It's so uncomfortable. Staying a few more seconds in that plank, it's so uncomfortable. It hurts, your whole body is shaking, but you are regulating yourself. You don't flip out, you don't lash out, you don't give up, you don't just let go, you push through. Talk to yourself, regulate yourself, get your emotions under control, say it's just emotions, push through. You know you can do better. You know it's just your ego trying to stop you. Whatever it is, shift your focus and get to the end. Finish it. You are going to be thankful that you did after. Finally, I want to talk about how emotional regulation empowers you to live as your most confident and aligned self. When you master this skill, you no longer feel like a passenger in your own life, right? Hence the workout example right now. Instead, you become the driver, steering yourself toward your own goals with intention and clarity in any situation. For example, emotional regulation allows you to set boundaries, so you can say no without guilt or anger because you're grounded in your emotions. You take more risks, so you're more willing to step outside of your comfort zone because you trust yourself to handle failure or criticism. You embrace change, so life's uncertainties no longer feel overwhelming because you have the tools to navigate them, right? So imagine you're pursuing a new opportunity, a career change, or starting your own business, a move to a new city, or starting a new relationship after a toxic one, right? Fear and self-doubt creep in. whispering, what if it doesn't work out? What if you fail? What if this? What if that? But instead of letting those emotions hold you back, you use emotional regulation to process them, reminding yourself of your resilience and capacity to adapt in a dysregulated situation, no matter what comes, okay? You take the leap, not because you're fearless, but because you're empowered and you're not afraid to move through fear. And that's how you should move through life overall, okay? Now, before we end this episode, I have some super exciting news. My all in community is officially launching today, the Coming Home to Yourself all in membership. This is your space to dive deeper into everything we talk about here: healing, mindset, confidence, and embodiment, with exclusive content and unlimited resources, live sessions, and a supportive group of like minded women who are all on their way and journey of coming home to themselves. If you're ready to go all in on yourself and your growth, this is your chance to join my world. I'm so stoked about this. You can find all the details linked in the link I'll leave down below or on Instagram in my bio. I cannot wait to see you inside. With that being said, I'm your host, Vanessa. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode of the Coming Home to Yourself podcast. Bye.